Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Taylor Combaluzier, a mining analyst at Red Cloud Securities. Today's webinar features Sterling Metals. Sterling Metals is currently advancing its 100% owned Sail Pond project located in the Great Northern Peninsula of Newfoundland, as well as its recently acquired Adeline project in Labrador. Today I have with me on the webinar Mathew Wilson, who's the CEO and director at Sterling Metals. Nice to have you with us, Matt.
Thanks a lot, Taylor. Always fun to be here.
So today's format of the webinar will be comprised of two parts. In the first part, Matt will provide an introduction and update to Sterling, including an overview of its two projects, as well as the exploration work that's planned in the near term. In the second part, we'll take your questions live, so please send us your questions using the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can during the Q&A session. So to start off, we'll handle the disclosures and then get into the presentation. So for Sterling Metals, there may be some forward-looking statements made on this call. I would direct listeners to the cautionary note on page 2 of the Sterling corporate presentation located on the company's website. For Red Cloud Securities, Inc., I would highlight that this webinar is for information purposes only and should not be considered a solicitation to purchase or sell securities or a recommendation to buy or sell securities. And we note that this call does not take into account the particular situation or needs of individual investors. Participants should rely on their own investigations and seek their own professional advice before investment. Please see our most recent research located on our website for Sterling Metals specific disclosures. So with that out of the way, I'll turn it over to Matt so he can update you on what you have to look forward to with Sterling Metals.
It's great. Thanks a lot, Taylor. Really nice to be here. It's a good time to be updating. The company just completed a raise of about $6.5 million at 15 cents, and the story has evolved a lot over the last couple of years. And so this is the presentation we use with a few different things that kind of go forward. So the idea here is just to bring everyone onto the same page and make sure that everyone understands why we're so excited here at Sterling and what the path is moving forward. So the company is focused, just for all those who don't know, on Newfoundland and Labrador. And we feel that this is an incredibly underexplored and just massive area of the world that just for so long has been overlooked, despite the fact that you have these global discoveries, the globally significant discoveries like Voisey Bay or even the newfound gold stuff that's going on right now. And so really nice place to be in the world. As Taylor had said, there's a forward-looking statements here, of which most junior miners are going to go through. So the story for Sterling, just as an overview, I mean, we started this company back in the summer of 2020. It was the middle of COVID, and the idea was to try and find something that had good access and was in a safe jurisdiction in the world. I think that more and more you're starting to see the problems that arise in being areas that aren't necessarily not stable, but yeah, stable. You see like the nationalization of lithium. You see issues with access and rights and government takebacks. And I think that being here in Newfoundland and Labrador, one of the better places in the world to operate, you're a phone call away from the government, and everyone is very supportive and enjoys the mining industry, which is shown in the giant iron mines and Voisey Bay. So great place to be in the world. And the two projects that we've gotten over the last 3 years all have one thing. They have these things in common. The first thing is scale. When you're a junior company, exploration is hard, and so you want to make sure that whatever you're going after has the scale needed, such that it would attract majors, it would attract the attention of investors, and be something that's that can make a dent in the global markets. Both of these projects also have grade. They say grade is king. It is relative to what system you're looking at, but both of these projects are very high grade for the relative kind of thing that you're going after. Both these projects also have a discovery on it already. We are not starting from scratch at this point. We were a couple of years ago with Sail Pond, but at this point, both projects have a discovery point, have a focus of the target of exploration along with the scale and grade. And as we mentioned, great place to be, but also the infrastructure for both these projects is terrific. Sail Pond has power right through it, towns nearby, airports nearby, and Adeline, despite being in the middle of Labrador, is only 70 kilometers away from a highway and 150 kilometers from Churchill Falls, a power station. So for a mine, really nice place to be if you were able to find something with scale. So moving ahead to this last point, which is team. And I think that we often overlook the team in junior exploration. It's usually the first place that you start when you're dealing with any other venture business, but in mining, sometimes we look past it, sometimes we overweight it, but for our case, I think our team is really fit for the assets that we have. Sail Pond was the driving force. So the last couple of years, that's why everyone came onto this project. Most notably of recent addition is Dr. Neil O'Brien and Dr. Steve Piercy. Dr. Neil O'Brien, he was the Senior Vice President Exploration for Lundin Mining from 2003 to 2018. Oversaw the creation of the Vicuña District down in Argentina. He was not directly responsible for all the exploration going on, but he brought in the CEO of NGX, Wojtek, and has been consulting with Philo since then. He was brought back out of retirement in 2018 to push forward just the narrative on big systems around the world, understanding large copper systems. And the Adeline project, which we have just recently brought on, is a huge copper system, of which he is an incredibly important person in pushing that forward and gives us perspective on what we're driving ahead. Dr. Steve Piercy is the chair of the Memorial University Geology Department and is the incoming president for the Economic Society of Geologists. So great person to have in province, very well connected, and just very, very knowledgeable person when pushing forward. The other person very worth highlighting is Jeremy Niemi. Jeremy has spent the last 30 years in exploration. One of the big things with Jeremy that applies very closely to our Adeline project is he was responsible for driving Noront exploration, which was a nickel discovery in the Ring of Fire, from 2 million tons to 20 million tons between 2007 and 2010. That project has recently been purchased by Wyloo, and the Ring of Fire, one of the better places to explore for base metals in the world, but also one of the harder places to explore. We say that you can't walk 30 meters without falling in the water up there. So with the Adeline project being in the middle of Labrador, it's close to infrastructure, but it's definitely helicopter supported for our first exploration program. Jeremy's the perfect person to push this forward, is very adept at taking projects that have an initial discovery, pushing it forward to resource, bringing in large players to advance it. So a great person to be running our exploration program. So let's talk about Adeline. With the addition of the new team, again, what I forgot to mention, so they came in for Sail Pond, all very interested in our recent discoveries back in December, specifically the high grade narrow veins of sulfur salts. But Adeline was purchased by us in the middle of March, and is what really is the driving force behind kind of the new shifting of focus for the company. Dr. O'Brien has kind of made, at least for me, he's kind of changed the way that I look at things. And I've been doing this for about 15 years, investing in junior exploration, but he's really put into perspective the importance of finding big rocks and big systems. So we think about Labrador as underexplored and overlooked, but why? What is it that drives people there, and what makes it so hard to be there? And what drives people there really is the macro of it all. And without going into too much geological detail, if you think about just big systems, you think about Voisey, these really large iron mines, where you are in these three crustal breaks, which you see there on the left, those black lines. The rocks of Labrador are very adept, very giving of large systems. And if you look at the other large kind of areas of the world, such as South Africa and Zimbabwe or parts of Russia, you can kind of pick a commodity and you'll show a large deposit within these big rocks. So the rocks themselves, they're ripe for big systems. And when you narrow it down a little bit more, this green and yellow area here, this is the central mineral belt of Labrador. On the west there is a copper horizon, on the east being the uranium horizon. Has a lot of similarities to the Central African copper belt. Right along this crustal break where you have there's this intersection of these three geological provinces. And so this kind of uranium and copper horizon, right where these crustal breaks hit, right in an area of the world which you know has big systems available, makes our copper system that we're looking at with Adeline really on a macro basis kind of the perfect place to be looking. So when we start kind of on a really high level, we're really excited about the rocks where Adeline is located. So looking more into what Adeline is specifically, it's important, I think, to have good project analogs. We're going to get into the project itself, but just to put a perspective onto what the analog is. One of the analogs we use is the Udokan project in Russia. So Adeline is a sedimentary hosted copper basin. It's 44 kilometers long, And you see that on the left there. If we look at the same scale on the right, the Udokan mine in Russia, it will be, when it starts to go into production, the third largest copper mine in the world. And the reserves there are 1.2 billion tons at 2% copper. So we're talking about not just a significant system, not just contained copper being one of the biggest mines in the world, but you're also just quickly noting the grade. 2% copper, you look at the mineral resource, 3 billion tons at almost 1% copper, and this big silver kicker. So the grades of this are really what make it unique, especially when you're thinking about this when it stands out against some porphyry systems. You're kind of dealing with the same scale, but you're dealing with grades that are much higher. So when we're looking at sedimentary hosted copper, something I've learned a little bit about over the last few months for sure. There was kind of the original copper mines. These things are close to surface, they're higher grade, and a lot of them have been mined over the last couple thousand years. So they're really hard to find, but when you find them, they don't hide very well, as we like to say. So it's important that when you do look at the system itself, that you have copper everywhere. And one of the things we are very confident about when we look at this project is that we have copper everywhere. This is a borrowed image from the government of Newfoundland and Labrador. Forgive the fact that there's no legend on this project. We're actually still figuring out what all these copper showings are, but this is a combination of grab samples, trenches, drill holes, stream sediment samples, and it just shows you that kind of along that green rock formation, that's the Adeline Island formation. It shows you that there is tons of copper everywhere. The white, I believe, is over 5% copper. But really the whole point here is that this is over 250 showings across a 44-kilometer long basin. Again, in this macro region, which drives big systems. So we have copper showings everywhere. We have a project analog that's world-class and just the right rocks to be in. When we look at a little bit more detail on the rocks themselves, again, that pink that you're seeing there on the screen, that's the Adeline Island formation, the target of the target horizon that we're looking at. There's an investor that came into this last financing that said it best, which is the good news is you have a giant system, and the bad news is that you have a giant system. And I think that when I was looking at this first, one of the hardest things is just thinking about all the companies that are out there that have these really massive project areas and big copper showings and nowhere to start. And you spend a couple of years looking at this. And in fact, that was a bit of a story of sail pond for us, where you had a 12-kilometer long trend and no drill holes. And it takes you a long time to figure it out. In this case, we're very fortunate. This project has been on and off explored for the last 60 years, very, very sparsely, very sporadically. But over the last couple of years, Dr. O'Brien and the ex-head of Valley Geophysics, Alan King, have basically layered all of the information together to determine a really great starting point. And that starting point is this red box in the top left there, the target that we are calling ELLIS. ELLIS actually has a discovery hole on it that is 8 meters, just under 8 meters of 1.76% copper and 56 grams silver. When we're thinking about sediment-hosted copper, we have to just step back a little bit and kind of understand what that actually is. So when we think of porphyry systems, which are the majority of what copper mining is, you think of almost like a big blob in the ground. And then it just goes really deep. You look at the things like Philo or NGX, and you're going 1,000 meters deep, these 1,200 meter intersections of great copper grades. And it's a vertical system just going up and down. When you think about sediment-hosted copper, kind of turn it on its head or rotated 90 degrees, and it's sort of it's better to think about like a horizontal system. These sediment-hosted copper it's hosted in a bed, and it almost looks a little bit like a coal seam. The average sediment-hosted copper project has essentially a coal seam between 1.5 meters and 5.5 meters thickness, but carries these 1% plus copper grades. In this case, there was a drill hole to test this theory back in 2011 by a company called Playfair. And as we said, this drill hole was 8 meters of 1.76% copper and 56 grams silver. That was underneath, and they're talking about layering of data, that was underneath a trench from the 50s. That was about 4.5 meters of 2.5% copper and 92 grams silver. So down about 50 meters down dip, you actually have had a discovery hole looking for this coal seam sediment-hosted bed that hit exactly what you were looking for. In the time that they were drilling, the thought process was that this was like these sediment-hosted copper systems that are in the north of Michigan, the White Pine White Pine Mine being one of them. It's about 200 million tons of 1% copper in these beds that go for a while. It is an interesting thing when you look back, because that was what they were drilling for, and they actually hit it. But as juniors go, it can be hard when you're exploring in helicopter supported area. You have a program that you want to do. They drilled 20 holes back then, and then you have to put your holes out for assays. And if anyone's been following our story for a bit, you know that assays can take a really long time to get. So one of the reasons perhaps that they didn't continue drilling is they just didn't know what the results were. The other thing that is of note is that the drill hole, which is actually in Dr. O'Brien's shed in Guelph, Ontario, the copper that is in it, that is contained in it, is in the sulfide called chalcocite. And chalcocite is a very rich copper sulfide. It's made up of about 60 to 80% copper. And what that says is that only about 3% of the rock, to get those grades, only about 3% of the rock, 2.5% of the rock needs to have this sulfide disseminated throughout it. So what's really interesting about this rock is you can't actually see the copper. You need a VG lens to see this. So the other reason is they might not have actually known that it was mineralized at the time, because you can't see it. So one of the great things though about that is that we do know that this chalcocite, this heavy copper presence in chalcocite is present in this gray bed, which is really important for the theory pushing this forward. So you have the right sulfide, you have the right grades of copper. And as I had mentioned, generally in sediment hosted copper deposits, you have this 1.5 to 5.5 meter coal seam that runs horizontally that people are mining. And so this thickness of 8 meters is very significant when you're looking around the world. Why this project really stands out though is not necessarily because of the coal seam. It's because when we go back to that comparable with Uticon, the mine, what will be the third largest copper mine, there were these cross-cutting structures that intercept the bed, the coal seam. I'm going to keep calling it a coal seam, the set-hosted copper bed, these gray beds. The structure that crosses it is made up of these really narrow quartz veins that contain chalcocite and bornite in them. And what happens is that when you get the intersection of the bed and this new structure, you get this blowout zone. And the blowout zone forms a really nice mineable ore body where these two things intersect. And that becomes very relevant when we look at the IP of this project. So what you see there is SL1110. That was the discovery hole back in 2011. And in the last 2 years, Alan King has put together an inversion of IP data that was done by Noranda that I don't believe was available prior. And you start to see that it looks a little bit better in 3D. But in this case, that drill hole actually clips the very edge of this IP anomaly. And this IP anomaly is about 600 meters long, 200 meters wide, or 200 meters deep, and 150 meters wide. So you're talking about a very substantial area of potential copper mineralization that matches the theory of these blowout zones, because you have this bed, and I'm just going to draw it in here. You have this bed that kind of comes down here. That's what this is here. And then you have the IP that pops out from it. And the way that it looks in the rest of the world when you do have these blowout zones is you have this core of chalcocite and bornite. You have this area around it of chalcopyrite and bornite. And then around that, you get this shell of pyrite and chalcopyrite. And the reason that's important is because when you look at a historical drill hole back from 1955, it was done by a portable rig. It could only go down about 150 meters. The last 10 meters of this hole, 5-10 meters, you get trace copper and pyrite. So for this, what Dr. Brian said, this epigenetic sediment-hosted copper system, you have this, the evidence that you have this pyrite, remember this shell right here, is this pyrite and chalcopyrite shell where you're going to get low grades of copper, but you're going to see pyrite. And then, as we know, this drill hole does not have any pyrite in it as we have the hole. So you've got the evidence that the copper-bearing sulfides, the copper-bearing, that core area is full of chalcocite and bornite. And then you also have this evidence of the shell. So very good for this theory of what we're trying to push forward, showing us that we have a really clear drill target to go after. And the drill program this year, hopefully will start in August, where we essentially turn the rig, put some holes into the middle of this anomaly, which is quite substantially large, and prove up the fact that it's not just the bed, it's in fact the balance of the anomaly contains this this very high grade of copper and silver. And that given it the fact that it's near surface, it would be a very quick and easy way to prove that there's a great starting ore body there to create a mine. This is a 44-kilometer long system, and we won't touch too much on the historical exploration, but there's IP that was done by Noranda that touched on 3 areas, all of which have had no drill holes put into it. There are holes 8 kilometers away from that first target, 2.5 meters of 2.5% copper. There's a trench 40 kilometers away, 7.5 meters of 1.5%. So a lot of different targets, a lot of different IP anomalies that we will also follow up on. There's also evidence of native copper that follows in the south of the surface, the south part of the system. If you look at the White Pine area up in northern Michigan, they had millions of tons of this native copper that formed small parts of the deposit. We think that there's a lot of evidence that there's going to be that sort of same thing to go along with these disseminated copper targets near surface. So a lot of different things to test here, but for us, it's really exciting because we have our first drill point, a clear place to go, a clear thesis to test, and then a bunch of follow-ups as soon as that IP makes sense. So moving back from Adeline into Sail Pond, what really brought everyone to the table in the first place, we move away from a very clear geological model. Set-hosted copper is 20% of the world's copper production. It's understood what's going on. There's IP to follow up, and Sail Pond is new. It was discovered at the end of 2016 by local school principal. It has weird geology. It is carbonate rocks. Veins play hide and seek. But what we do know from the work that we've done the last couple of years is that we have a very significant footprint of very high grades. The drill hole in the bottom there, number 64, was really what got everyone over the line excited. This 100% replacement of the dolostone is in this sulfur salt metal that was made up of almost 8.5% copper and almost 1,600 grams silver, big grades of lead, antimony, and zinc, as you see on the left. And that was a kilometer away from this massive sulfides and quartz veins, which was 6% copper and 1,600 grams silver and up to 30% zinc. So you have these 2 different kinds of massive mineralization within this 1 kilometer footprint, which starts to look like this. And there's clear trend lines going on the left. This is the Heimdall zone. And so between the 2, you understand that there's really high grades. There's multiple pulses of mineralization. That is always a positive for a big system. And this is within this 12-kilometer long trend, which is what we started with a couple of years ago. The challenge for us as we went forward in our drill program last year is that we tried to treat this like a vein system, like in the Abitibi, basically, where veins will stay continuous and you drill underneath it and it swells into something better. But what ended up happening is that you see that these quartz veins and these sulfur salt veins, they come in and they disappear and they're fractured, and the rocks kind of almost in a snakes and ladders kind of way move back and forth. And so what we started in February was an Orion survey, which is a fancy version of the Titan survey, to provide us with a 3D model of both the chargeability and the resistivity of specifically this area. It's a 3 by 2 by 2 kilometer block. The focus of this is to show where these high resistivity zones, which is the dolostone, the right rocks that you want to find, matches up with the chargeability anomaly, which is the sulfides that you want to see. The theory here is that there should be some sort of feeder, like the plumbing for this system, underneath this 1 kilometer long footprint that will allow us not to follow these veins down in the trends, but to actually just drill straight into the feeder and provide a lot of bang for a buck for our drilling. That should be out pretty soon. And I think that will provide really clear drilling program for us, which we hope to start in the middle of June. One of the great things about having these 2 projects is they're 500 kilometers apart, as the crow flies, at least. There's an easy way for us to lever the synergy of these 2 projects. Our team, a lot of them stay in Rodditon the whole summer. The idea will be to bring a drill crew into Sail Pond. We're going to start drilling there in June. Pick up the drill rig, pick up the geology team, move them up to Adeline. We have a great understanding of how the project, how the permitting process works and how the province likes to see things done. And so it's an easy way to add Adeline into the mix without a lot of bumps and bruises, as we've spent the last 3 years kind of building up this understanding with our Sail Pond project. So the proposed work program for this year, I think our market cap is about $15 million. We have almost $8 million in the bank from the last program. So we have these two wonderful assets to drill. As you'll see in this program, number 3 is Sail Pond. That was what we're going to start with. That's going to be done in the middle of June-ish. Again, it'll be a very targeted drill program this year. It's not a regional look. It's like we're drilling for these chargeability anomalies that are in a highly resistive area. That will show that this is the plumbing, the feeder system for this really significant footprint of mineralization that's over top of it. As you'll see, compared to the drilling at Adeline, it is a little bit cheaper. We are pretty proficient with drilling now at Sail Pond, especially when we have mostly most of the team being full-time. So that technical services, that's our geology team, our transportation and logistics costs, that's all fixed in there now. So you're looking at $150 to $200 all in a meter for the Sail Pond drilling. And that's how we get to that number with it, which is still pretty conservative. Drilling at Adeline is helicopter supported. Again, this is why it's really fortunate that we have Jeremy at the helm of leading our exploration, who, if you can explore in the Ring of Fire, you can explore anywhere. So the idea of Adeline is to go in, drill 2,500 meters, put a couple holes into ELLIS, good amount of holes into ELLIS to really show what that IP anomaly is made up of. And then also to poke a few holes into different conductors and different areas to show the kind of the different geological theories that go along with it. And then the airborne survey, that's number 2. It's a 44-kilometer basin at Adeline, so we're trying to figure out the best survey possible to ensure that we have a good understanding of the deep geology of the basin, much like we just did with Sail Pond. That way we can kind of narrow down where we want to look. And just it will make things a little bit more efficient. But $8 million in the bank, program is about 4, easy to expand moving forward. So good buffer there when we push it forward. From a capital structure perspective, we just raised this money at 15 cents. It was about 80% institutional in the deal. It makes up that institutional insiders now are just under 60%. We have a really strong retail network, good supportive shareholders. And so again, with about a market cap of about 15 million, just under 8 million of cash in the bank, trading at just about 2 times cash, we're pretty primed as we go forward into this season for some explosive growth as we drill out these 2 very exciting assets. I want to thank everyone for their time. And I hope that if there's any questions, Taylor, I'm right here, and please reach out to me anytime or anyone that's viewing.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Matt. That's a great presentation. So now we'll turn to the Q&A portion of the webinar, and just a reminder to everybody on the line that you can type your questions in the chat box at any time. So to get going, maybe just in terms of Adeline, at the beginning of the presentation, you're talking about the mineral belt in Labrador. What are some of the reasons, I guess, that belt hasn't been explored as opposed to other better well-known ones, such as in Africa?
I think that it's funny when you're comparing it to Central Africa, because you think of it being really hard in Central Africa, but Labrador is tough. We're just going through this. We acquired this in March. It is really hard. It's very forested. If you go way up to the nickel areas, west of Boise, it's pretty flat and barren because you're above the tree line. But where we are in the Central Mineral Belt, there's a lot of trees. There's a lot of dense area. The black flies suck. Honestly, it's tough exploration work. And so it took even the 60 years. And then you needed someone like Dr. O'Brien and Alan King to come in and layer all the data together for even that people to get that excited about it. So I think the big challenge is just there's not a lot up there. I mean, Paladin has the Michelin deposit and the uranium side of things, and there's all these uranium occurrences. It's just I think it's just hard work. That's really we're finding it out right now. It's tough to access.
Right, and the how are the ground conditions? You mentioned forests and everything. Is it boggy or anything, or is it relatively dry?
No, it's actually relatively dry. If you look at the formation, there's kind of lakes that run around the main area of interest. Like they're pretty on the outside of it all. It's actually quite a nice place to. It's a nice place to be. It's not like the Northern Ontario where you kind of just have bogs and swamp everywhere. Here it's pretty stable rock. There's some cliff sides that make some access a little bit tough, but for the most part, pretty stable. The ELLIS target's been drilled 3 times, so like no problem with kind of getting in there. The drill pad is actually still there from 2011. So it should, the access doesn't seem to be too much of an issue.
Okay, and is it year-round access to the project?
It isn't yet. It will be. The idea is that as soon as we drill, and we will have an XRF gun on site so that we know that invisible copper won't be invisible to us. But as soon as we hit what we think we're going to hit, then we're going to start building a camp. You land, make a runway on the lake, and you have an all-season camp going. Because actually drilling here in the winter would be quite nice. I think the temperature goes down to -15. It's not that intense a place to be. So the idea here would be to drill, prove the concept, and then get going on an all-season camp right away.
Right. Okay. So then so I guess on that front, in terms of logistics, it's definitely something that you're able to you think you'll be able to manage kind of going forward, and getting this exploration going on this project again.
Yeah, I think that's where that access road, that highway comes in. I mean, it's 70 kilometers away, so when you start talking about something that's this significant in size, a winter road there would be very easy to build. I think that it would be of benefit to both us and the government to kind of make that happen. I think that, again, the more that gets proven in this belt, I think the more infrastructure. I mean, the Newfoundland and Labrador government is tremendous when it comes to trying to support mine discovery, right? And so if we can make this happen, the guys at Labrador Uranium are looking for big IOCG things next door on the uranium side. And so if this can kind of get known of that, then infrastructure will be put in place. But just for our project specifically, I mean, 70-kilometer winter road, not so bad. Again, it's 150 kilometers from Churchill Falls, which can provide all the power you could possibly ever need. So you're dealing with something that is, when you're talking about the comps and the analogs here, like this is a big potential project. And so you need that big infrastructure in place. And so this is a fortunate place to be because you're close to power and roads. Right.
Perfect. Okay. So I guess a bit more of a technical question. Hopefully it's not outside your wheelhouse, but just wondering, you mentioned the sulfides, particularly the chalcocite, as the enriched layer that's of interest, obviously. Are you seeing any oxides at this deposit, such as, again, similar to Africa, or is it different in that respect?
Yeah, those cross-cutting structures, actually, they were mapped really well by the team at Mercator. They came on site in 2021. So the company that had this they did a really big field program in 2021. They didn't drill a hole, but we were able to take advantage of the fact that they did a really nice job of mapping everything. So yeah, you see a whole bunch of stained oxides on surface. What's really interesting, though, and Neil makes the really big point of saying this, is that at Uticon and here, the chalcocite and bornite, it's kind of like this, it's black, and it kind of just stains outside of these little quartz veins. So in that cross-cutting structure area, you could actually walk over it and not see it because it isn't oxidized. So it's sort of it can be hard to see, like the trenches. It does when you open it up, and it does stain. But the hard part about these kind of systems is that you don't actually get that much visual on surface in that, like the big turquoise hill, so to speak, yeah. Right? Like you're not looking for like these big boulders of malachite. Yeah. You're looking for like this invisible chalcocite and bornite that looks very black and kind of stains outside of these quartz veins. And also those cross-cutting structures, you're dealing with 1 centimeter quartz veins. That's what it is at Uticon. And so 1 centimeter is not very wide. And you can look at it, and I think people just say, well, forget it, doesn't matter. So it's kind of an easy one to overlook. And so the mapping job that was done in 2021 was great, because that ELLIS target is actually right at this cross section where you do see the quartz veins and then the staining. You do see the quartz veins, you see some other staining, and then you also have the bed, obviously, from the trenching, right? So it's it was fortunate that we got that.
Right. Okay. So we have a question here, just wondering if any technical reports have been completed for either Sail Pond or Adeline at the 43-101 level.
Yeah, Sail Pond, you can get the one, it was done by Dr. Steve Piercy, who is an advisor for us. He wrote it for the guys at Altius and then wrote it for us. I think it was done as of 2020. When we got the project, it's on our website at sterlingmetals.ca. The technical report for Adeline was done by the guys at Mercator. It is not on our website because it wasn't written for us. We are optioning this property right now from a company called Chesterfield. Chesterfield is a London listed company. The technical report for Adeline is on their website. Just a good time to touch on what the deal actually is. So we purchased the option to own 100% of this property from Chesterfield for 400 grand in cash, which we paid, 4.5 million shares, which has been transferred. And then the option is for 100% that by November 2024, we pay another 400 grand and an additional 4.5 million shares. So they're big shareholders, big supporters of ours now. And the technical report is on their website. We're not putting them in ours because it wasn't written for us. Both are rather outdated, and so we will probably circle back on both of them post drilling at Sail Pond and post drilling at Adeline and get kind of a big overlay of everything that's there in the winter this year.
Yeah, perfect. That'd be good to get a nice fresh update and reports for both. Okay. So just looking, I guess, at Sail Pond now, you know, the drill program you have outlined, is that going to be more infill drilling or is it expansion step out drilling?
It's definitely not infill drilling. That would assume that we have a resource and that we would want to kind of expand on that near surface. So that near surface area, the HEIMDALL zone, truthfully, could be a very nice bulk tonnage target. Connecting where those higher grade trends are could be a nice starter open pit. We don't have a resource on that. I'm not necessarily interested in putting a resource together for this low grade bulk tonnage area. I think that if you look at the trends, there's these high grade trend lines that go straight from surface and point towards where we think we're going to be going, which would be a great thing to start with. But the big part of Sail Pond is the grades, right? So what we want to find is not where all this 200 gram sort of equivalent trend. We want to find the source of it all. And that would be the expansion drilling. And so the idea is that you have this kilometer footprint and that underneath there's plumbing that's creating it, right? So all these little fractured, narrow, all over the place high grades, like they're coming from somewhere. And so the idea is the survey that we're going to put out and then the drilling that we're going to do is to show whether or not we can prove where they're coming from. Okay,
perfect. So now, I guess now just, you know, at a high level with, you know, now having the Adeline project in the portfolio as well, what is, I guess, the strategy going forward? I mean, obviously lots of exploration on tap, but I mean, you know, beyond that, is it, you know, is M&A still in the cards? You know, what's kind of the thinking, the big vision?
I think so. It's a great question. So when we only had Sail Pond, we got asked a lot about whether we were looking at other projects. And the one thing I said was, well, it has to be as good or better than Sail Pond. I think that we really knocked the ball out of the park on this one. I'm so excited about Adeline, just the scale and the grade and what we're going after here. And so I would not say that never could it happen. I think that if there was somewhere we could spend our money that's better than Adeline and better than Sail Pond, sure. I've scoured a lot of different projects now, though, and Adeline to me is extremely special, given the fact that the potential to put Canada back on the copper map is right there. You're dealing with systems that are world class, and we're dealing with it right here in our backyard. So I haven't seen a lot to me that would warrant us looking elsewhere. But again, I won't say never because that I think is a little bit too binary.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. So I'm not seeing any other questions in, but I'll give viewers a minute to think of any and kind of give you the final opportunity, the final pitch, if you will, if you have any last words while people think about final questions.
No, really just thanks for the time. I think that, you know, it's again, Canada used to be a top 10 copper producer. There hasn't been a lot discovered here in the last 30 years. And there really aren't too many projects that you can find with scale like this that have the grades also to make a really significant dent. A lot of the great copper projects in the world that are found right now are down in Argentina and they're down in Chile. And I think that the opportunity to push this forward and make a discovery like this is really exciting for me. Having done this now just for, you know, having done this for a little bit now. And I think that the Sail Pond will be really exciting also to finally see where things, hopefully see where things are coming from. It's a lot of high grade over a long way. So it's two pretty fun projects. And then we're going to have a lot of drilling news that comes out this summer.
Okay. From Sterling Metals. for taking the time to host the webinar today with Red Cloud Securities. And thank you to everybody on the line for tuning in with us.
Thanks a lot, Taylor. Take care, everyone.